Welcome back to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming and our Wraith the Oblivion Chronicle. By this point, hopefully you will have already seen the character prologues for our 4 characters in this chronicle, where they were still among the living, at least until the end of each of their respective stories. Now, when we were playing those prologues, they weren't actually playing static characters. Rather, they were just playing narrative characters that were going to inform some of the stats that would be assigned to the sheets later on when those characters were built properly using the game system. So now that we've got there, we're going to do something a little experimental. This is going to be our final session using Google Hangouts, and Google Hangouts has got a pretty decent screen sharing feature. We're leaving Google Hangouts for a couple of reasons. One, it won't exist anymore. Google Hangouts on air, at least, won't exist anymore as of the beginning of August. And two, it will be nice to use a system that links more handily into the Twitch channel. We'll be doing that. So that'll be good. We might even start doing some live streaming onto the Onyx Path channel. How about that? We'll have to see. So, with that said, you can't see the lovely faces of my 4 players for this session because they have character sheets thrown up right in front of them. And you've got to be honest, it's an improvement. But that said, I mostly see people as long lines of words and code anyway. We're going to go through the character creation process of Wraith the Oblivion, which will entail creating the Wraiths, and with a bit of luck, we'll create their shadows as well. I'm not sure whether we will do the shadows on this occasion, or whether we will do it at the beginning of the next session. It depends. I may think of making the shadows after the characters, just based on what decisions some of the players make. So we'll see what happens. We'll play it by ear, nice and fluid, like ectoplasm. So we'll get straight to it. The players will all mute their microphones, please, if they haven't already, as I go through the character creation system for Wraith the Oblivion. As with most storyteller games, the first thing you do is come up with your concept, and that's nice and easy because you've already done that with the prologue. Don't forget to mute yourself, David. You also generally ascertain the kind of person you were, whether you were, as the name implies in the, as the information implies in the book itself, whether you're an addict, an artist, a blank slate, cop, crook, dabbler, guardian, things like that. I'm very proud of this chapter, by the way, because I wrote it. You then have to ascertain how you died. Now, on the character sheet itself, it's the same kind of sheet that you see in most storytellers' games, where you have your name, the player name, the name of the chronicle, nature, demeanor, and so on. But you also have life and death. Now, what our players need to be doing right now, all 4 of them, is completing their character name in the name section. They need to be completing a brief blurb on what they were in life and a brief blurb on what they were in death, how they died. And all of that fits onto the top row of the character sheet. So while they're all muted, they can type that up. A character's way of living and also the way they died have a big impact on the kind of character you end up going on to play in Wraith the Oblivion. For good reason. You are playing characters who have died, who exist in the underworld of a sort, and therefore things like your reason for living or your reason for hanging around are critical to a Wraith's existence. If they don't have a reason, then they will succumb to oblivion, they might transcend, they will otherwise disappear. So while they're doing that, the book suggests not only do you work out how you died, it also works out asks you why you're still here. And that's something I want the players to think about, because there's a section on the top row of this sheet called regret. Regret is the why are you still here question. The characters may not know, or the players may not know yet. Some of the suggestions are confusion. For instance, you weren't the only one to die in that accident, so why are you the only one here? Failure. Whatever it was you were trying to do in life, you failed. Now that you're dead, you may have a chance to finally get it right. Guilt. You did a bad thing. Now you won't let yourself rest until your burdensome guilt can finally be assuaged. Legacy. There's little more important to you than what you left behind. Your legacy will flourish no matter what you have to do to ensure that. Love. There is love beyond death, from the lifelong devotion of a married couple to a parent watching over his child to a hopeful lover who never got a chance to say I love you before she died. The power of love can give a wraith reason like nothing else. Missed chances. Regret for all the things you failed to do in life anchors you to the Skinlands. As a wraith, you won't let those chances slip away a second time. Mission possible. Your mission doesn't stop with your death. You may be dead, but you're still on the case. Need to understand. You need to know why you died in the way you did, and how you brought yourself to that last inevitable point. Until then, you can't rest. Resentment. The family who moved into your home after you died shouldn't be there. What's yours is yours, even after you've gone, and God help anyone who tries to take it from you. Revenge. Someone put you in the underworld, you intend to return the favour. Unfulfilled destiny. This is all part of a bigger plan. You have a grand destiny, and death is just one step along the way to fulfilling it. Unrevealed truth. You died with secrets untold, the location of the family fortune, or the composition of your secret chemical formula, and so on. Now you need to make it right. So those are the kinds of examples, and even just reading through them, having obviously played through the prologues with our players, I can think of some regrets that those characters may have. And I may be off base. Sometimes it's interesting for players to choose a regret that doesn't occur naturally to the character. So as an example, we had our amateur boxer in the form of Jonas, and for me, almost the overriding feeling from his character would probably be love as a reason for hanging around. But Vasilis, the player, may well disagree, may feel that Jonas is hanging around for another reason entirely. So we will see. We will get to the players very shortly. So the other sections on the top half of the character sheet, or the top row of the character sheet, are nature, demeanor, and shadow. Shadow is going to be an important one. We'll get to that soon. But nature and demeanor come first. If you've never played a World of Darkness game before, you may not be familiar with the subject of nature and demeanor. But in short, a nature is what your character is deep within, may not be a personality you show. Demeanor is the personality you have on the front. It's your mask, it's your face. Now, in mechanical terms, the benefit of having a nature and demeanor are as follows in most of these games. If you successfully roleplay your demeanor, you gain a willpower point. If you successfully roleplay your nature, you can recover all your willpower points. I usually add a little extra there, because there's nothing stopping a player just playing the character's nature full stop and never resorting to demeanor, in which case why have two? You have to somehow achieve your nature via your demeanor. That is how I think a character can regain all of their willpower or equivalent stat. So here are some natures and demeanors that the characters may feel, or the players may feel, that their characters possess. These are all personality archetypes. You may be an activist, an architect. Again, these aren't professions. These are, an architect is, for instance, someone who wants to build a better world, maybe, or just build an edifice to themselves. Avant-garde, bon vivant, bravo. I'll explain what some of these are if you don't know, and some of these aren't terribly common words. So, for instance, a bravo is you make a stepping stone of those weaker than you. A bureaucrat, a caregiver, a child. Now, child doesn't necessarily mean that you were a child. It might mean that you can't help but behold the underworld with wide-eyed wonder. In other words, you still see everything with a certain power of innocence. Competitor, conniver. Conniver is someone who takes advantage of others. Critic, deviant. Enigma. An enigma you'll change whenever people think they've got you pegged. An explorer. Fanatic. Follower. Gambler. Jester. Leader. Going back to follower, running a lot of these games, I've found that very few people are ever happy to be a follower, mostly because everyone wants to be the hero of their own story, and that makes sense. The follower nature and demeanor is actually one of the most interesting ones in that regard, because, for instance, if your demeanor is follower, you may act like you follow other people, but in truth you may have a hidden agenda as your nature. Or if your demeanor is bravo and your nature is follower, you may be a very rambunctious, very loud, very overconfident to compensate for the fact that in truth you are someone who always toes the line in the end. So, martyr, mediator, optimist, penitent, pragmatist, rebel, rogue, you'll never succumb to the whims of others, scientist, survivor, traditionalist, and visionary. So that's a list of example natures and demeanors. So have a think, players, if you haven't already, about which natures and demeanors you want for your particular characters. And then we will get on to the important question of your shadow, if I can find it easily. So you go ahead and look. Let's see. Let's start with Vasilis. Could you take your microphone off, please? And screen share your sheet. Thank you.
Does this work?
Keep talking.
Does this work? Is it okay?
It does. All right. So I'm going to mute my microphone, and you can talk the viewers through what you have put on your character sheet so far.
Okay. So my character's name is Jonas. He was an obedient son, a worker, not a very particularly hard worker, and aspiring to become a husband and probably a father. So that's been his life till the point he died, at which point he was seeking fame and thrill by being an amateur athlete. I was a little bit conflicted between love and guilt for regret, because I thought that love is appropriate, being his primary emotion that he experienced throughout his life. He loved his family, he was driven by this, this love was reciprocated, and his life was full of it. So maybe he's regretting that he didn't manage to see it through and continue his journey on becoming a husband and a father. Or maybe it is guilt because he was warned by both his wife and his father not to attend this boxing match, during which he had a very weird health accident. So I was between love and guilt, but I think I chose love because it's the strongest emotion he experienced. So for his nature, I wanted him to be a follower. He's the second child of his family. He had to follow both his father at work and follow spiritually his bigger brother, who he admired and looked up to. And the way this comes forward in his behavior is that he appears to be a traditionalist. He always respects his special traditions and the way he was brought up. He really believes in the wisdom of the elders, and he tries to live up to all this. That's all I have for now.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Vasilis. And let's go to David Fuller now. What information have you got on your character? And could you also remind the viewers of who you were playing?
Sure. I'm playing Professor Albrecht Lane, who in life was a world history professor. He died as a side effect of a revolutionary bombing. He died of smoke poisoning a few months later. I decided that his regret is missed chances. He always wanted to go see the world, and he just never got around to doing it. And so because of that, his nature of explorer makes a lot of sense. His demeanor is activist, because he'll talk about fighting the man and such, but really he just wants to see new things, go explore the world, or the underworld as it is.
Yeah, well, you might get to see some more of the Skinlands if you come through the right tear in the shroud.
Yeah.
And how about you, Mark? What about your character?
Well, my character is a non-commissioned officer in the Felix Brzezinski regiment. And well, what I decided about him, let's see here, is that his nature is that of a survivor, and his demeanor is traditionalist. So he adheres to he knows his place. He likes to be in an organized environment, do his little job, be in his place, because he sees this as a way of surviving. He will be safe for as long as he is in his place. Like as long as he is conforming to what is expected of him. He does not necessarily like always doing it, but he knows it's a safe thing to do, and it will help him survive, blend in. And well, just a second here. The computer is acting up. The reason for his death is he has been shot, murder most likely. And well, his regret is what still binds him is probably not knowing why he died, and suspecting it might be related to that case that his friend dumped on him, and that he really wanted nothing to do with it, but he got it, and Will wants to know why he did everything that was expected of him, that everyone expected of him, but still he didn't survive. Something went wrong. So why did this happen? And maybe correct what was wrong.
Perfect. And then we have our other David. Sorry, other David, for being other David, but David, let's see your character sheet.
It's okay. I understand. I judge you deeply for it, but
Now, for some reason,
Okay.
your sheet, although I can see it down in my small window, I'm not seeing it up in the screen when you're talking. Try saying something at length. A lyric from a favorite song.
Oh geez. See, I'm actually probably just going to talk about the fact that I'm having a hard time deciding which lyric I'm going to use, and that's going to end up being an extended period of time.
That's perfect, because it has now shown up. However, it does look like your life, death, and regret have still been left blank.
That is true.
All right, well, you can talk through them then instead of filling them in, and I'll let you fill them in at your leisure.
We'll talk through it. I was thinking of things. So for nature and demeanor, I think Nolan, nature of a dreamer, makes a lot of sense for someone. We'll just say optimistic enough to have decided to go here on vacation. And more so, just his life was very much one of dreams and, always kind of living both in and outside of his head. And the demeanor of a pragmatist, I think, is just something that always got him by. Not that he's not a pragmatist, because to a degree he certainly is. But I think those work very well. Now, my question is, life, death, and regret. Are there... I understand there are specific terms for some of them, but I didn't get the life and death ones. Regret seemed kind of obvious, but so for life and death, is it just there's no drop down or anything? So is it just whatever I think?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You can fit it in narratively.
Okay. Okay, it's narrative then. That's fine. I'll think about the specific words I want to put in, but I think that his death was certainly one of it was murder and it was of conspiracy. But it was also of convenience. It was him quite a bit. It was just easier that way. And when it's your life, it's going to be a little annoying to be like, I was gotten rid of because it was just simpler to be gotten rid of. As for regret, I mean, he has an attachment to Duchess, absolutely, and that's a huge part of his regret. So there is definitely the love there, but there's also the wanting to, honestly, for him, it would be less the wanting to know why and more the dismantling or destruction of the fact that this place is so messed up that this is how you deal with problems, is you just disappear all of them. I'm not sure how we would put that forth in words, but I'll think on it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. And with all the players once again muted, not in enthusiasm, I hope, we're going to jump ahead slightly on character creation to do a little bit of the shadow creation. So anyone who's unfamiliar with Wraith may not be aware of what the shadow is, and I'll start with the basics. Most people know Vampire the Masquerade. It's often best to refer people to something they already know. And in Vampire the Masquerade, you have the Beast. And the Beast is, of course, that force within that is compelling you to eat people and rage and frenzy, as it were, and basically succumb to the ultimate monster that you are. Now, in Wraith, you have something a little different. You still have an internal voice, but that internal voice tends to be far more lucid, and it's known as the shadow. The shadow is it's a cross between id and every self-destructive impulse that you've ever felt. The shadow doesn't want to be destroyed. Quite the contrary, the shadow wants to take over the Wraith. The shadow is your worst personality traits that existed when you were alive, sometimes dialed up to ludicrously extreme levels. And it attempts to convince you to do things in your own self-interest, for your own self-preservation, no matter the toll that may take on you. And quite often the shadow's advice is perfectly logical. It isn't just whispering things in your ear to wind you up, although it can do that as well. It will give you the most rational the most rational suggestion, and the suggestion that will most accurately play on your character's nature. So the shadow can sometimes be quite difficult to resist. Every Wraith has a shadow, and the way Wraith the Oblivion traditionally works is that another player at the table will play the shadow of another player. So they may adopt a mask or put a hat on or speak in a different accent when they are playing the shadow of this other player. We will get on to how shadow is being played come the first session, because you'll witness it, and it will partly depend on the software we have available to us. The important thing right now is to define the type of shadow that your character has, because even though another player will be playing that shadow, you still get to decide on the details of that shadow. You get to decide who your tormentor is going to be, because while it's fun, fun may be a rather strong, generous term, while it is one hell of an experience to have a shadow, the idea of losing agency can be quite alarming to some players. So giving them as much power as possible over who the shadow is, the way it's going to be played, is very important in a game of Wraith. This can be quite off-putting to some, but shadow play can be any level of extreme, all the way through to mild. It's barely there. While it is an intrinsic part of the Wraith the Oblivion setting, it doesn't have to be overbearing. So we will play it by ear. We will discuss it with each other, of course, between sessions, how shadow play is going, and if we need to tone it down or turn it up, we will. So, first things first, we decide on the type of shadow each character has. And as you all have a free shadow box on that top row of your character sheet, I would like you to choose one of these archetypes, and I'm choosing archetypes from the core book of Wraith the Oblivion here. So there are more in the Book of Oblivion, which is available on Drive-Thru-RPG. Here we go. We have the Delver. I'm going to be going into these in detail. We have the Delver. Nothing is as simple as it seems, and nothing is worthwhile unless it involves some significant issue. This shadow plumbs the depths of everything and anything, looking for a subtext, even if one doesn't exist. What are you really thinking, is her mantra. Why did you really do that? The Delver's not satisfied with easy or obvious answers. She has to pick everything apart until she drives you, your friends, and everyone you encounter stark raving mad. That's part of the Delver write-up from Wraith 20. The Abuser. And the Abuser is an unpleasant one, but we will go through it. Hurt terribly once, this impatient and jealous shadow exists to inflict his pain on others. He scrutinizes the failures of everyone around him, heaping scorn upon them whenever he can. This is done partially to bolster his self-image, but primarily to make everyone else hurt just as much as he does. The Abuser will often goad you to attempt the impossible, just to watch you fail so that he can dine upon the self-loathing your failure engenders. The Director. Quiet and organized, the Director will take you apart with clockwork precision. Icy in her hatred, she will strip your defenses away layer by layer, taking pleasure in the surgical nature of the torment she inflicts. There's nothing personal in what the Director does. She's just setting the record straight by removing any delusions you might have about your goodness, sanity, or any other worthwhile qualities you might have thought you had. The Director's usual modus operandi is to rifle through the back drawers of your mind, cataloguing every weakness, every painful memory, and every personality flaw, no matter how minor. This ammunition isn't randomly flung about either, but hoarded for special occasions. Should your grasp on reality start to falter, the Director knows just how much pressure to apply to push you over the edge. The False Friend. Cheerful and personable, the false friend doesn't seem like an enemy. Sure, it's fond of making nasty wisecracks about your associates when they're around, and of course it puts down any course of action you think up with a vicious bon mot, but it's just so darn fun to be around that you don't mind. The fact that it's slowly poisoning your relationship with everyone you know by filling you with contempt for them just slides on by. Your shadow makes you feel cool, so what do you need those other losers for? And when it's separated from your friends, then the false friend turns around and lets you know exactly what it thinks of you, how easily it fooled you, and how worthless and faithless you really are. You're probably getting the impression at this point that these shadows aren't very nice. They're not. Some people will play Vampire the Masquerade like this. You don't get it often, but sometimes the Beast is played as this cunning. The parent. No one else can love you as much or as well as the parent. No one else can take care of you as well or make you as happy. The parent even accepts all of your little imperfections, which she'll harp on endlessly, in order to prove to you she loves you despite your nearly infinite flaws. She'll protect you from people who don't have your best interests at heart, and only she can decide who those are. Usually it's everyone else you know. You're her darling baby, and so naturally she'll help you with the hard decisions and even make them for you. Mother or father knows best, even if you break her heart by never listening to her and running around with those renegade hooligans. A few more. The martyr. Noble self-sacrifice has its place, but what the martyr offers is a shallow mockery of it instead. By constantly demanding that you give of yourself because you can take the pain better than anyone else, the martyr cheapens your faith and indulges your arrogance. Claiming your sacrifice will bring about a greater good, the martyr will then take pleasure in demonstrating that your pain didn't do anything at all and that your suffering was pointless. Still, that won't keep him from urging you to give up yourself for others every chance it gets. After all, it's just looking for a good excuse to take the easy way out. The monster. Brutally direct, the monster is all about pain and greed. Whatever it wants, it will command you to take. Whatever it hates, it will demand that you destroy. If you refuse, it will try to destroy you as well, for it cannot stand to be resisted in any way. There's no compromise or subtlety in the monster, and often it's the most dignified and delicate wraiths who have a monster lurking behind their eyes. To see the monster dominant is to see a sneak peek of specterhood. Becoming a spectre is about the worst thing next to Oblivion that a wraith could want. It will lay waste to anything in its path, taking what it wants and destroying everything else out of sheer spite. Guttural and vulgar, the monster rarely has anything to say that isn't an obscenity. The somnambulist. Life was a blur, unlife more so. The somnambulist sleepwalks through afterlife, dripping ennui. Nothing is worthy of her attention unless it's directly in front of her, and then she won't do anything to remove the obstacle. The somnambulist downplays the importance of anything and everything, claiming that the details are always irrelevant. It wants the psyche, that's the opposition to the shadow, to slow down and not give it a migraine worrying about what that growing patch of black on the wall might mean down the road. For the moment, the splotch isn't bothering anyone, and that's all the somnambulist cares about. The perfectionist. Nothing you do will ever be good enough for the perfectionist. Perform 7 impossible things before breakfast and he'll be screaming at you for not having pulled off 8. Any imperfection can serve as a launching point for a tirade. Any flaw will be a magnet for withering sarcasm. By playing up your inevitable errors, the perfectionist inspires your self-hatred and saps your confidence in your own abilities. Then, once your confidence is shot, he'll be more than happy to step in and show you how to do things right. If you had any sense at all, you'd turn things over to him permanently and make sure that everything got done properly the first time. It's not like you're capable of it, after all. 2 more. The voice of hope. You never really died. This is all a mistake. Once you figure out how to reverse this condition, you can return to your old life as if nothing happened. This whole thing is one long bad dream. You will wake up. You have to, sooner or later, right? This cruel shadow denies the reality that is your ghostly existence. He holds out a bright candle, sustains you through the bad patches, but that becomes an unattainable torment as time wears on. How long could a nightmare possibly continue anyway? Doesn't it ever end? And the final one, detailed in the core book. The Storm Crow. Always the bearer of bad news, the Storm Crow is convinced that there's a landmine under every speed bump. She is certain that every wraith harbours ill will, that every action is going to be disastrous, and that every corner houses a lurking spectre. More to the point, she will detail these worries ad nauseum to the psyche, revelling in every gruesome detail she can invent. As far as the Stormcrow is concerned, it's not enough that a wraith's actions be doomed to failure. The wraith has to fail spectacularly, and in such a way that the wraith gets the chance to regret the error for a very long time. So those are our spectral, our shadow archetypes. Hopefully the players have picked one each for their characters. It'll be interesting to see whether any of them have picked the same shadow. If so, that's absolutely fine. You can have the same shadows in a group. So, with that said, let's go over to Vasilius again, and I will mute myself, and Vasilius can talk about the shadow that Jonas has. And Vasilius, you want to share the screen that has your character sheet on. Unmute yourself too.
I hope this is on correct now. Am I unmuted?
Yep, you're good. Tell us a little about your shadow.
Okay, perfect. So my shadow is the parent. Pretty straightforward. Jonas's life has all been about following commands by his father. He's a traditionalist. He is very very sensitive and very susceptible to being guided by an overprotective parental figure. So both the father or the mother could work for him. And one of the hardest things he had to do was deviate from the advices of parents who are not fully capable of understanding what he really wants. Instead, he's just doing what they believe he wants.
I like that. I can see how that would fit in with your character quite well. Essentially, even in death, he's still hearing the voice of his father, essentially telling him what he's failed at, what he's not good enough at, how he's let the family down, how with his death he has basically caused the entire family to fail, that sort of thing.
Yep, exactly.
That'll be fun. Okay, and David Fuller, how about you?
I hope you don't mind. Would it be okay if I take one out of the Wraith Player's Guide that Mr. Gahn has on the sheet, specifically Mr. Adventure?
Yeah, you can take one from the Player's Guide. So this isn't actually, I don't think we have Mr. Adventure in the Book of Oblivion either, so this is from a previous edition.
Yeah, I have the PDF of the old edition, and Mr. Adventure just seems to fit Albric. Mr. Adventure is the shadow that wants you to have fun to dangerous extremes, wants you to go explore even though you should not. And so I think it plays up really well with Albric's desire to go see new things. But Albric is, he's a wise man, so he'll take pictures from a mile away from a volcano. Mr. Adventure wants him to get right up to the lava. And I think that's a perfect shadow for Albric.
Lovely. And what about you, Mark? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to do. Yes, I don't know if I'm decided. I might do something similar to David, because I think something that defined Gunther's life was that he was very guarded. He didn't really trust other people. He never succeeded in any relationship. He didn't trust anyone but his close family, his parents, maybe his sisters, and perhaps maybe Mr. Paranoid could be that, in which he's always, doubting everyone around him, fearing that he might get hurt. So that's why he's very guarded. He doesn't trust easily. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think it makes sense. And to be honest, it would almost be ramped up with your character's death. You're paranoid because of your death, I think you were paranoid. Your paranoia in your life was increasing the closer and closer you got to death, because you had doubts about the other. Well, your I think your sergeant. Your lieutenant. Sorry. So yeah, I think that works perfectly well to go for the paranoid.
Okay, we'll go with that then.
Okay. And what about you, David Hicks? You'll need to start screen sharing again and unmute yourself, if you're around to do so. I'm not getting any responses from our other David. So that means we are going to soldier on.
Nope, I'm here.
Ah, you're back. Okay.
I somehow was muted in 2 places.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really know how that happened, but okay.
Okay. Could you screen share your sheet, please?
Yes, I should be able to. Oh, did you turn our stuff off?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Are you sure? Because I was.
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird. Because I was muted in Hangouts in both things, and I don't mute Hangouts. I only mute my microphone. So hold on. I'm having to reshare everything.
I definitely muted one day. Well, I muted David Fuller. Not because I don't like you talking, David.
That's why I couldn't. It doesn't matter. Okay. So it should show again. I screen shared.
Yep.
Okay. So I was a little bit unsure here. I currently have the Stormcrow because I think that makes a lot of sense. I was also considering something more conspiratorial, as our last player also went, because I feel like everything that went wrong could have gone wrong. And I feel like that could go either direction perfectly fine. The end of his life was very much every conspiracy and every paranoid assumption was correct. You know, it's like, oh, are you really going into a hostel and, changing your appearance? That's so silly. And then a bunch of people show up looking for him. So I think the Stormcrow works because I think that's it's kind of a different take on paranoia, if you know what I mean. That was really what I was thinking.
Okay, I'm happy with you taking the Stormcrow, and yeah, I think it works because in that those last few days of your life, everything that could have gone wrong did. And I imagine that feeling in your head hasn't just gone away with your death.
Exactly, and that's an annoyance. It's like everything I thought maybe, every sign that was pointing towards this could be bad, all of it was right.
Perfect. Okay, if everyone can mute themselves again, we will get on to the next stage of character creation. Right, so the next stage of character creation is, as with most storyteller games, we're going to start looking at attributes. And attributes are your natural traits, usually. They are things that partly come through birth, but you can groom them as well. They're things that specifically don't tend to be taught. I know that doesn't make much sense given that one of them is intelligence, but we'll go for it. They're very general traits, and every character has 9 attributes: 3 physical, 3 social, 3 mental. And each of those traits has an automatic 1 dot in each. So everyone has 1 dot of strength. Everyone is capable of exerting some strength. If you don't have a 1 dot of stamina, you are dead. Everyone has 1 dot of intelligence. Everyone has 1 dot of appearance. Now, some of these can be reduced to 0, the social stats more than anything else. But I think for the sake of this game, everyone will start with 1 dot in every attribute. Now, everyone gets to choose where they assign 7 more dots, whether it's physical, social, or mental. Everyone gets to choose where they assign 5 dots, physical, social, or mental, and 3 dots, physical, social, or mental, until you have a primary field, a secondary field, and a tertiary field. At the end of it, none of them should be 1 dot, 1 dot, 1 dot. All of them should have something applied. And again, what I always find interesting when players create characters independently of each other is whether the circle of wraiths, in this case, is going to end up naturally balanced or not. Because, for instance, I know that one of the characters was an amateur boxer, and so it may make sense for physical to be high for that character, but I also know he was, I think, a middleweight boxer, and so he's not going to be some lumbering super heavyweight. Likewise, I know one of our characters was an officer in the Stasi, and while it may make sense for physical to be quite high up on that character's traits, it's more likely that character is going to be adept at investigation or indeed interrogation, social kinds of traits. So always interesting to see how these attributes get lined out. Now, before we go back to the characters, or the players, I should say, I keep mixing that up tonight, we will also assign abilities. We're going to do attributes and abilities all at once. And abilities are your talents, your skills, and your knowledges. There's a whole range of them, as we will see very shortly. And every character gets to assign 13 to one of those columns, 13 dots to one of those columns, 9 dots to another column, and 5 dots to the third column. Again, they get to choose order of priority. And at this point, it may well feel like your characters end up far too slim when it comes to ability points. That's absolutely fine. At the end of character creation, you will gain some freebie points that you can assign to some of those abilities if you so wish to improve them. Just remember that characters are often better if they specialize, at least to a degree, than if they're trying to become jacks of all trades. Because if you become a jack of all trades, you'll fail your dice rolls almost as often as you'll succeed them, and that's not much fun for anyone. So just remember, if you're good at something, do put points in it. Final thought before you have spent all of your dots. And this is a rule I often apply as a storyteller. It's think of the character reason why you might have dots in these abilities. Usually I look at abilities like firearms and melee as the ones least likely to just be taken by the average person on the street. But that's because I often run games for people in Britain, and firearms aren't commonplace in the UK. Whereas if I was to run this game for a lot of American people, it's more justifiable, and not saying this with any derision, it's more justifiable that Americans are going to possess at least 1 dot of firearms because there's a greater firearm culture in the USA than there is in the UK. So, depending on where the characters are based, what the histories are, think about why they might have the dots they have in the traits you're choosing. And if there are any traits that you don't understand, if you need additional explanation for what they are, please ask me now, and I will explain them to you in the context of the game. So, with that said, do any of the players, and if there's silence in response to this, then that's good, do any of the players have any questions about any of the attributes or abilities and what they mean? Feel free to take your microphone off and tell me.
For abilities, is it cap out at 3 at this point?
Yeah, I tend to suggest capping abilities at 3 at character creation until you get to freebie points anyway.
Okay.
Any more for any more?
I'm sorry, it's 15, 9, and 5?
13, 9, and 5.
13, 9, and 5, 13.
Mm-hmm. Seeing some, just looking down at the character sheets that are being made in my window, I can see that we've got a few different characters in build, and that's good. You know, it's very odd, as the person who wrote this chapter of the book, looking back at it after all these years, because I think I probably wrote this 5 years ago. Guess. Wow, okay. So that's strange. Just while players are doing what they're doing, it's odd to think that I worked on Wraith the Oblivion that long ago. It was a situation where I hadn't really done much work for World of Darkness before then. I did a little bit on World of the Apocalypse, I did a little bit on Vampire the Masquerade, and I ended up approaching Richard Dansky, the developer of, well, not just Wraith 20, but most of Wraith the Oblivion. And I had a previous relationship with him through my YouTube channel, because I interviewed Richard Dansky during I think it was before the Wraith 20 Kickstarter, in fact. And I got in touch with him and said, hey, do you need someone to write some of this book? I love Wraith. Wraith is my World of Darkness game. I explained to him why it was so important to me, what my experience was, and he gave me about 20,000 words to work on this material. I think it was character creation, and I might have done a little bit else. Sometimes the content you put into role-playing games merges when you have lots of assignments. But this was the very first core rulebook I ever worked on, Wraith 20. So there's a tidbit of information for the viewers that you may not be aware of. My very first core rulebook was Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition. So there you go. The players may think I'm talking to them. I'm not. I'm talking into the camera for anyone who is watching this when we upload this for wider viewing. So I think I've probably rambled on for long enough now.
And one question.
Yes.
Difference between alertness and awareness and alertness.
So alertness is how alert you are to things like ambushes, surprises, and it's a more grounded alertness. Awareness is awareness of supernatural activity. So how tingly your spider sense becomes, I guess, when there's more ghosts around you, when a vampire is using a discipline on you, that kind of thing. So yeah, alertness is based around more, I guess, mundane physical action, and awareness is more supernatural action. So after this part, we're going to go on to the very exciting section that is advantages, which is your arcanoi, or arcanoi if you prefer, and then your backgrounds, passions, and fetters, and those are arguably what make your character exactly what they are. So I will say this: your arcanoi, which are your Wraith's version of disciplines, they will be linked to specific attributes. So what I do, and what a sidebar in this chapter suggests, is if when you get to your arcanoi you find that it requires an attribute that you have barely any proficiency in, you can at that point start rearranging some dots to make that attribute a little better. And that isn't power gaming, it's just basically ensuring that your character can use the power you've gone to the trouble of buying. I'd much rather players are having fun with their characters than playing one who was, I guess, built not for fun. So we're going to go to Vasilis again. I'm sorry, Vasilis, I keep going to you first, giving you the shortest amount of time, but that's because I trust you to have it done. So let's talk through your attributes and your abilities, please.
Okay, no worries. I I have a clarification question. This is we are adding dots to the attributes section, even though there exists one in each, right?
You are correct.
It's not that I have to make the total be 7.
Yep.
Okay.
So yes, so yeah, you add
I
7
went-
on top of the 1.
Great. And so my order is strictly in the same way that that Jonas lived his life. Primarily, he has worked on his physical strength, so he's relatively strong. So I went for 3 strength, 3 dexterity, and 4 in stamina. My social attributes is the other thing he had. He was a young man. He was quite good looking, and he was very charismatic. It was never hard for him to start conversation or talk with people or enjoy the company of others. And the last thing is his mental capacities. I guess he just has his wits about him and relatively intelligent, not the brightest person ever. Perception, he was a young man. He never learned to look deep into things, so I kept it at 1. And manipulation, he was always almost naively honest, so I don't think he has the capacity to manipulate anybody. For my talents, this is the category where I placed 13. I chose alertness, athletics, because he was both because he was boxing, brawl, the same, empathy, because he had a very loving family, so he learned to communicate and perceive emotions, and streetwise, because he was constantly hanging out in his hometown, because he didn't do any other sophisticated hobby. Crafts, he has a very lousy craft. He knows how to build toilets and sinks, so he has one on that. He used to drive around, so he's an average driver. He's average at using anything that involves fighting melee, because he knows how to aggressively position his body or defensively in a fight. So that's why I gave him 3 for that. Performance, mostly athletic performance. I don't know if this qualifies, but I didn't see him having anything else. I don't think he's keen leader or he has etiquette or is stealthy in any way. And then my last category is knowledges. I think like 5 was more than this character could have here. I gave him 1 in bureaucracy because he lives in DDR, so he had to go through millions of papers working in a public factory. 1 in computer because he had to use one. I wasn't really sure, like it's just the most basic of
No,
that he
I
has
think
access to it in his home, but whatever. That's right. Medicine because he had to bandage his own wounds a little bit during boxing. Politics because he listens to the radio and he listens to sports and things like that. So he's a little bit aware of how these things go. So he knows the lingo, but he's not a very keen politician or very good at playing in this field. And technology because he had to work in a factory, he knows how to use different kind of machinery and whatever else was available over there.
perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much. That sounds excellent. And David Fuller, now it's over to you. If you could just share the character sheet and take yourself off of mute.
Okay. So from left to right, even before he became a old man, Albric never was much for physical activity. He'd much rather be, head in a book than play in a sport. So I gave him strength 1. He can lift the groceries, but that's about it. Average dex and stamina 3. He managed to live to an old age, so his body was healthy enough. In social, gave him average manipulation, average appearance, but I gave him a high charisma because he had to keep, a university room of students engaged, had to reach them, had to make his presentations interesting. Otherwise, nobody would learn anything. He is heavily focused on the mental side of things. I gave him intelligence 4 and perception 4. He has just an incredibly deep mind, picks up details in the books that he's reading, the context, notices, who's goofing off in his class, but just average wits. He sometimes takes a little longer than he needs to think through things. In his abilities, I gave him a dot of alertness. Again, just gotta notice, what students are goofing off in the class. Empathy, figure out, is a student, are they telling the truth when they said they couldn't get the assignment in because, the dog ate it, or are they lying to me? Expression, you've got to be kind of skilled in speaking. Gave him persuasion 3 because, throughout the years, he had to convince boards to give grants. He had to convince higher ups to look the other way while he, did certain agendas. And that kind of plays straight into why he's got a couple dots of subterfuge. He had to bend the truth sometimes when speaking to government officials. Over in skills, he's got a couple dots of etiquette because he had to know how to hold himself around officials. He was in a profession in a very strict society. Leadership goes on with, reaching the kids, reaching the classroom, motivating the students. And he is heavily in knowledges. Academics 3, and I might even raise that with my freebies later. Bureaucracy 2, he was in the system.
I'll interrupt briefly. As you've got 3 dots in academics, do feel free to put a speciality in there. Academics, like crafts, is one of those abilities that I think you should put a speciality in immediately.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's a weirdly broad subject.
Right, so I went ahead and did especially world history because it's the class he taught. So bureaucracy because he had to understand how the system worked in order to work in it. Enigma's 1 dot. He was a fan of the occasional puzzle, the occasional crossword. Investigation 3, just kind of representing when he had to do in-depth research for his own papers or to prepare for his agenda for his syllabus for the class next year. Politics 1, the visit from the political representative that ended up leading to his death wasn't the first time he had to deal with the government. So, he's got to know who's who. And science 3, he was good friends with some other teachers. And he was just an academic mind. So he'd keep up on current events in science. And that's him.
Perfect. Okay, 2 to go. Mark, what about you?
Again, okay, I'm muted now. Well, let's start with the beginning. The least, I think the social part is the weakest part with Gunther, because let's admit it, he's not the life of the party, so to speak. He's a very guarded person, few friends, not very social, but he's not lacking terribly in social skills either. So it's average across the board on social. Then physical. Well, he's a soldier and fairly strong. He's a paratrooper, actually. So I figured that has to be, a bit better, at least. And then maybe he's more strong. What's stronger with him is his mental abilities. Yeah, he's very perceptive. He's very intelligent. perhaps 2 intelligence for his own good. And when it comes to abilities, the one that has the highest probably skills, again, mostly because he was a soldier, so he has training in firearms, fighting stealth again, paratrooper, maybe doing scout intelligence missions, and leadership because he was in a position of leadership, having to lead his men. And then what comes next is talent. He has some alertness, again from his training, some athletics from his training, a bit of brawling, and will be an Stasi member. I guess we can have their intimidation be high in the mix. He knows how to scare people when he needs to, I guess. Then knowledge is probably his weakest. He's a non-commissioned officer, has a high school degree at most. He has some knowledge of bureaucracy and politics, of course, and he is basically he has a base level of knowledge in politics and interest in politics. At least to know, what he's supporting, what communism is about. I figure probably everyone in the German Democratic Republic has to have some knowledge of politics, if anything, because of how the government wanted to make everyone class aware. And then perhaps his strongest part of knowledge is his investigation. Again, he was a Stasi personnel, so I figured that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good spread of powers. And finally, we have David. Let's look at your character.
Okie dokie. You seen my sheet yet? Yes. No.
I am, but when I was giving a thumbs up. Don't worry, I went.
Oh, sorry.
So we don't see your sheet immediately when you start talking. It loads up about 5 seconds later, but that's fine.
That's weird. Okay. So, Nolan recently graduated college, did pretty decent at it, but also played football in college. So, I actually went with I went a little interesting on this. I think it makes sense. So I went primary on social, secondary on physical, and tertiary on mental. Football player, college football player, not a big college that matters football player, and for non-Americans out there, American football specifically. I don't think we cared about what we call soccer in the 80s. We're finally starting to now. But so I went 3 strength, 2 dexterity, 3 stamina. Played center. A lot of it is just hitting the person in front of you and not letting them get past you. I went high on social. It's something that's always come naturally to him. I went 4 dots in charisma, only 2 in manipulation because it's never really been his style, and 3 in appearance. And mental, I went straight 2s down the board. However, I went primary in knowledge. So I see him as a person who doesn't have a lot of inherent built-in intelligence, but studies hard and learns things. So he did well in school, not because he had a lot of, his IQ was particularly high, but because he put the effort in and learned what he needed to learn. So I started with knowledges and gave him 2 dots in academics to represent getting through school. And for his major, I gave him 3 dots in computers, the 1980s versions, and 3 dots in technology, as well as 2 dots in science. The dot in occult comes from growing up with a mother who was very religious in the Roman Catholic sense. and a dot in investigation and enigmas. I think enigmas more comes from school and just solving esoteric problems there, and investigation comes from being an inquisitive person. Talents, I gave 2 dots of both alertness and athletics. Those would both serve on the field playing. A little bit of awareness. I think that's just natural. Some people have it, some people don't. A single dot of brawl, because if you learn to hit people in a on the field sense, you can at least hit them okay in reality. Some empathy, some expression, some persuasion, normal stuff. No intimidation. He's never really been that kind of person. And then in skills, a dot in drive. It's something you know how to do. A dot in firearms. Grew up in rural New York. Guess what? You know how to at least shoot and not shoot yourself with a gun. A dot in leadership. Just working on the team, has been on teams forever. A dot in melee. That's more of, once again, grew up in rural New York. And a dot of performance. That's probably not very good guitar playing because 1980s college kid. Yeah, I could see it.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. That is attributes and abilities for every single player. So now we get on to arcani, backgrounds, and passions and fetters.